Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corpin here with School Transportation News. We're excited you made it to the podcast. Brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing. And we also have our sponsor, First Student. We have an interview coming up a little later with Kevin Matthews, the head of Electrification. But before we get to that, I want to bring on Miss Taylor Hannon and Ryan Gray. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Hey.
Hello, everybody. Mrs. Taylor Hannon Ekbatani.
I keep messing up the last name, right?
It's all right.
I forget. I was at the wedding, so I should know this, right? I mean, I'm telling you. Well, you know, Taylor's going to be talking to Kristi Harden, the executive director for Cumberland County Schools in North Carolina, coming up too. So excited for that convo, Taylor. But before we get to that, want to kind of dive in, just talk a little about some headlines that we were talking about before we started the podcast. And big headline coming out last week was kind of a really sad story, a Thailand preschool massacre by a police officer on drugs. I mean, absolutely horrible. Ryan, do you want to kind of fill us in on this?
Yeah, obviously no school bus tie-in really, but I think from an education standpoint, obviously folks all across the industry, all across the world are seeing this headline and just, I mean, so tragic and needless and just disgusting. I mean, at least 37 people murdered by, like you mentioned, actually a former police officer who apparently was fired because of use of meth. Don't know what exactly was the motive. That's what the reports are when we were recording this. But our hearts go out to all those families. It's just really sickening. And it just brings to light again this new environment we find ourselves in. Gun violence is just, without getting political or any of that, everyone has to admit that there is a problem, especially when you're looking at schools and kids can't go to school safely without some type of threat. We talked last week about a student who was arrested in Ohio for bringing a gun to school, was seen on the school bus, and another student told the school bus driver this girl was sick of being bullied. She was going to do something about it. She had it. Obviously, there's been so many other, tragic instances here in the U.S. with just, dozens of people killed at school. When our kids can't go to school and feel safe, then we know that something is really wrong. And, this brought home to me last week, my school here in the Southern California area where my daughter attends. They sent an email home and said, by the way, we're going to be training all the kids and staff on run, hide, fight. And I'm no law enforcement expert, but we work with law enforcement experts. Michael Dorn has been a mainstay at our STN Expos. Reno, especially over the years. His son, Chris, was at STN Expo Indianapolis a few years ago when we launched it. Brett Brooks was at STN Expo earlier this year in June. And I know that there's issues with run, hide, and fight. You can, a lot of people say, hey, well, something has to be done. You can't just let the attacker go on a killing spree. But run, hide, and fight was never developed for school setting. And it's, unfortunately, I keep, talking to Mike and Brett and I read all these articles from other, school security experts and law enforcement saying, hey, hold up, this is a knee-jerk reaction. And, it just, like I said, brought to home, my God, what kind of society are we living in? So, again, our hearts go out to all those families affected in Thailand and everywhere that's been affected by school violence, especially, when these kids are trying to get an education.
Yeah, devastating, Ryan, for sure. And just to kind of transition to, there's been a lot of violence. And we saw it. I know I saw a headline, our own Taylor Hannon. I sent her a message on it too. Las Vegas, we had a bunch of parents that assaulted a school bus driver because the bus was an hour late. 3 parents literally beat a school bus driver. Completely unacceptable, crazy nuts that came out of Las Vegas. It was reported on last week. Just scary, right? Yeah, things happen. You run late. why is it like vigilante justice all of a sudden because your bus driver's late? That's a little aggressive, right? And these people, Battery and Las Vegas, basically came out and said, look, the school bus is an extension of the classroom. We view this as if you entered the classroom and were violent against staff. Students are present. It makes an impact. This is very scary stuff, and we have to be very aware that crazy happens. And this, in Thailand, that's crazy. Parents jumping on the school bus and beating the driver for being an hour late, that's crazy, right? But crazy happens. We just got to be prepared. We have to be trained, up to speed on all the latest and greatest. And guys, it's the reality we live in. Kind of scary stuff, though.
Absolutely. Well, switching gears on a little bit lighter note, Taylor Hannon, I want to bring you into the conversation. You attended the latest EPA Clean School Bus Program webinar last week, and they're talking about, kind of putting a bookend on this rebate program, this $500 million rebate program that ran through the summer, and looking forward to the next round of this first year of $1 billion. Can you provide us an update on what was talked about?
Yeah, I love the EPA webinar, so I'm excited that they're back. Lots of good insight there and, a lot of community involvement. This one was a listening session, so it kind of invited people to come on, share their thoughts. The last one, the 2022, was a rebate, and so some people question, why change the wheel? Why not let it be a rebate instead of going to this grant program, which is going to be a lot more paperwork and a lot more details kind of there. So I know they have a lot to sit on, but I do want to give a shout out to Nicholas Martini. So he attended TSD 2021 and then STN Expo 2022, and he jumped on the EPA webinar and said that he was at Green Bus Summit. So I know you'll be excited to hear that, Tony. He was at the Green Bus Summit at STN Expo Reno and was talking to someone in a Head Start agency, and they actually said that they can't apply for the Clean School Bus funds because, they are not one of the eligible applicants. So he shared his perspective there. A lot of people came on and shared, about the eligibility requirements and why their school wasn't selected, why they felt like, I shouldn't apply, this is a barrier for me. And so it was a really good conversation. It was 2 hours, and about an hour and a half of it was just kind of people coming on and sharing their thoughts. So there's an article up, but it was really great conversation.
What were kind of the outcomes, Taylor? I mean, what were the other subjects? Obviously, the Head Start conversation came up. People talk about the increase in funding. Was there, when's it going to get distributed? What was kind of some of the conversation of that webinar?
Yeah. So the rebate program, the 2022 rebate program, they're going to announce those winners at the end of this month. So stay tuned. We'll probably be in NASDIP's, Tony, Washington, D.C. conference when they announce that. So that's kind of how, 2022 kind of, locking out. But for the 2023 Clean School Bus Grant Program, that one is kind of what's up in the air. And so a lot of it was talking about prioritized districts. And one of the biggest things to be a prioritized district is you have to be at 20% or more students living in poverty. And there's a breakdown based off of the U.S. Census Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates. And that's what the EPA used. And so a lot of people are at 18%, 19%, these school districts. And so they don't want to apply because now they're not getting as much as the funds. So if you have a prioritized district, you get the full maximum funding. Whereas if you're not, you get a lesser amount. So that was one of the conversations that people were having, was like, maybe there needs to be a different mechanism here where if you hit that 18, 19%, maybe you should get 90% of those funds instead of dropping all the way down to a lower tier.
That's interesting. They feel almost de-incentivized to participate because of that kind of threshold.
Yeah. I couldn't remember the word off the top of my head, so thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that one of those school districts that made a lot of waves about this was Chicago Public Schools. And I think they were mentioned in that information session last week. So, I think they had like 19% of their students that qualified for free and reduced priced lunches. Mm-hmm. And again, that threshold is 20%. So they just got cut out, or seemingly got cut out. They still got money, but to your point, Tony, they didn't feel it was worth it. And we've talked about that a number of times, whether it be Medicaid funding or different grants, where a lot of districts feel that it's just too much work for what they're going to get. And if they're going to essentially get, the money necessary to pay for like a diesel bus, but they want electric, they don't see, the incentive for them to, or where they're going to come up with that additional $250,000, $300,000 for an electric school bus or,
right.
Propane or CNG, obviously a lot smaller, but I think the same applies to their thinking.
Yeah, and a big conversation was also the infrastructure because, getting these electric school buses, you need to have the charging infrastructure in place, whereas they want the money beforehand so that they can start making those conversations and start getting that infrastructure in place.
Yeah, and a little later, too, I'm talking to Kevin Matthews at First Student, the head of electrification, and he's going to talk a little more about this, too, and kind of what they're doing because they're pretty much the industry leader in electrification at this point. So he's talking a little bit about all the customers and school districts they deal with and kind of the next steps that they're planning on taking. So it'll be a really interesting conversation coming up, too, guys. But also want to dive in, Ryan, we had been talking a little bit about NTSB and some of their goals for the coming year. Want to share a little bit about what you found out lately on that?
Yeah, well, actually, it was a board recommendation made last month, September 20th, where it's looking at alcohol impairment detection systems on all vehicles. So we saw that and we thought, okay, all vehicles, we want to make sure, does this include school buses? I spoke with a senior official at NTSB last week, and she confirmed, yes, school buses are at play, again, with all vehicles. But she really told me that the focus here for the alcohol impairment, at least in the commercial vehicle side, is truckers. Now, it was mentioned to me that there is some nuance here, and I have an article at stnonline.com that dives more into this topic. But on the face of it, a lot of folks might bristle when they think, oh, alcohol detection system for school buses. Wait, what? And, I was told that NTSB investigators do not view drunk school bus drivers as a widespread problem that they're trying to address with this. When it comes to school bus drivers, what they want to affect or impact with this recommendation in NHTSA is better driver oversight. So it was noted 2016, it seems like a long time ago before COVID, but we all might remember there was 2 high-profile fatal crashes within 3 weeks of each other. There was that Baltimore Public Schools crash where the driver had a history of health issues. It was epileptic and suffered a seizure behind the wheel. Luckily, there were no kids on the bus at the time, but there was an attendant. And that attendant got seriously injured. The driver died, and they actually caused 2 crashes, hit a car, and then kept going down the road because the driver was unconscious, and ended up crashing into a fence and kind of guardrail. And then 3 weeks later, we had, of course, the Chattanooga Public Schools school bus crash, and a lot of us remember that, and multiple fatalities in that, where the driver was found later to had just had a phone call and then was speeding, and there was a history of this behavior. But nothing was done about either situation. And so NTSB came out and found fault with both contractor employers of the bus drivers as well as the school districts, saying, hey, as we've heard a lot of times from our legal eagles, school districts, when they're contracting, can't just wash their hands of any issues. This is still, their driver per se and driving their students. So, the impetus is on all parties involved to make sure that there is that proper oversight. So the senior official at NTSB was telling me that really, in addition to what they're called passive integrated alcohol impairment detection systems. So these are essentially technology that is going on new vehicles, and NTSB wants NHTSA to mandate this again for all vehicles, that senses passively, so not blowing into like a breathalyzer or something like that, but has some kind of sensor on the steering wheel or somewhere in the near, where the driver sits, that can intake the breath and can analyze and detect if the blood alcohol content is over the legal limit. So now that's 0.08 for you, me, all of us who are driving our passenger vehicles. But when you're talking about commercial vehicles, most of the time that's 0.04. So it's much more strict. But in addition to that, NTSB is calling for advanced driver monitoring systems or a combination of that with this alcohol impairment detection capabilities. So what is meant by advanced driver monitoring systems? Well, a lot of you know, and some of you have it already, GPS on school bus. There's a lot of coaching technology where, whether it's AI based or video based, can detect driver behavior behind the wheel, uses G-force sensors to indicate speeding, hard braking, curbing on right-hand turns, any of those type of incidents that trigger the system. And then it sends reports. A lot of times it can do real-time alerts to supervisors. And it's meant to be used as a coaching mechanism to sit down with drivers and even in real time alert the drivers that, hey, something's going on here. Are you distracted? And certainly, obviously, depending on how egregious the actions are, that could lead to, further discipline. But it's really meant to try to, actively help drivers be better at their jobs. So that's kind of the nuance there. So it's really interesting. And as I was researching this article, I learned that NHTSA is actually already working on something. It's called the Driver Alcohol Detection System for Safety, which DADS, DADSS, and that's in partnership with the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety. And basically, they're looking to develop just what I described, kind of a first of its kind technology that would detect when the driver is intoxicated. And, it explained on their website that a good video that shows this, basically like a vent almost above the steering wheel that as the driver sits down and is exhaling, can take in that air and analyze it for the blood alcohol content. Also, interestingly enough, most of our newer cars have that push button technology now for the ignition. So when the finger hits that button, there are sensors in that button that can read through the skin the presence of alcohol. And both technologies disable the vehicle from starting. So I reached out to NHTSA when we were recording this. I hadn't heard back yet, but really interesting stuff. More of a total safety approach that NTSB is trying to take with all vehicle transportation. And of course, they have their top 10 most wanted list, and DUIs are definitely part of that. So you can head over again to stnonline.com and read more about this issue.
Yeah, and Ryan, I think one of the other bigger topics we've seen is we saw Joe Biden's administration pardon or suggest to pardon anyone with a marijuana misdemeanor. And I know the use of CBD and marijuana as it relates to school bus drivers, where there's basically a zero tolerance. Now you're starting to see kind of repealing of some of this stuff. I don't know if it really is going to make a difference in the commercial markets, but, we're talking about intoxication. Well, how about drug use or impairment with marijuana? Is there going to be a sensor for that? Who knows? It feels like we take one step forward, another step back. So I don't know. These are some interesting headlines we're starting to see as well that relates to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's something that, I had already been reaching out to folks about. We have several consultants in the drug and alcohol consulting and testing sphere that we've used at our conferences and used in articles. I hadn't heard back from them. And my question was, you're seeing a lot of laws now, especially like California just passed one, where it's now going to be illegal for employers to essentially fire workers that test positive for drugs, namely marijuana, and they can't test them. So we're seeing this trend building across the nation. And then when we were recording this, President Joe Biden, basically pardoned all people convicted of marijuana possession under federal law. So that's like 6,500 people that were convicted of simple possession from 1992 through last year. And, what it says to me, though, is, it's time for us to re-explore this issue. We know that, yes, federal law dictates that commercial drivers, the FMCSA says if you have a CDL, federal law trumps any state laws. And regardless of what the states say about, either medical marijuana or recreational use, that you cannot use it when you're going to be driving a commercial vehicle like a school bus. And, CBD, while not illegal, it's an unregulated industry. We've written about this. So you don't know if there is cannabis, THC in it, how much. So you really run the risk if you're a commercial driver, if you're taking even CBD, that you could test positive. So now that we see President Biden come out and say, hey, I'm not only pardoning all of these folks with simple possession under federal law, but also he wants the class 1 drug delineation to be relooked at. So, marijuana is weighted just like it would be heroin or LSD. It's sending some mixed signals, I think. And in part of, if we're going to not classify marijuana as a class 1 drug anymore, does that have any potential impact on what the CDL laws are? I don't know. That's what we want to find out. But definitely things have gotten more of a gray area, so to speak, for a lot of drivers. And I think it creates an additional burden on student transportation leaders out there, especially as they're dealing with the driver shortage.
Yeah, Ryan, lots of big topics. But before we get to our guests, our friends at TransFinder have something that's going to make you sing. They call it their quartet, 4 solutions that will keep your team singing from the same songbook and bringing the music to your ears. That's Route Finder Plus, the lightning fast browser-based routing solution that creates the safest and most efficient routes and bus stops. Stop Finder, which is the industry's leading parent app that shows where students are in real time. Wayfinder, the driver app that keeps your drivers and substitutes having to clamor for more, as well as Viewfinder, which allows authorized users to monitor your entire operation and make sure everything stays on time and on key. These award-winning solutions work in harmony with each other and will be there when your district needs them. Email them at getplus@transfinder.com or call them at 800-373-3609 and tell them we sent you and you want that quartet. You'll be singing in no time. All right, guys, super excited to have this next guest on. The topic of electrification has been red hot in the school bus industry, and we have Kevin Matthews, the head of electrification for First Student with us. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here and certainly appreciate the work that you guys do at STN to educate all of us on all the world of school bus transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to take in with this green energy thing. I feel like the headlines are coming from all directions, and you got dropped into this position, head of electrification, and seems kind of like a new school title. I'm sure you've been quite busy over the last 18 to 24 months doing things. Can you kind of give us a little flavor of what that all encapsulates for you?
Yeah, sure, Tony. Glad to go through that. So, First Student made a pretty significant commitment to begin electrifying our fleet across North America. And so decided to create a centralized, dedicated team to develop the strategy and also the implementation of that program. And so that's what I'm overseeing. So in the last 12 months, we've deployed 185 electric school buses into our fleet. And by deployed, we don't mean ordered, we don't mean committed, we mean in our fleet, charging, delivering students every single day. And so, we are North America's leader in school bus electrification transportation. We've taken a very strategic path to that. There are things we want to learn and understand as we go forward, particularly how cold weather impacts charging and route range, how mountains impact that. So we've been doing this in a very strategic fashion so that we learn lessons in these initial deployments that we can then use going forward so we don't run into issues that will slow us down.
Yeah, I know we had Alex Cook, your chief engineer, who won STN's Innovator of the Year Award for 2022 on the podcast. There's also a great article with Alex that you guys can go check out on stnonline.com. If you go to our magazine section, you can read all about that. And Alex gave us kind of an overview of some of the larger projects you've been doing. You want to kind of share a little more about kind of where the deployment of these electric school buses are?
Sure.
Why did you choose those locations? Give us a little kind of reasoning. What's the method behind the madness, right?
So Quebec is our largest deployment to date. Probably, I think as of yesterday, around 170 units on the road and operating in Quebec. Reasons: one, money. The Quebec government has quite a bit of money for school buses and infrastructure that allowed us to do that project. They also had the first mandate that all new purchases have to be electric. So a lot of financial and legal reasons for us to be doing that. But also, as I mentioned, it's cold. And we knew if we could figure out how to operate in Quebec, that would really influence the way we do things going forward. Learning how to operate in those cold temperatures in Quebec, very, very beneficial to us. Then as we look around the rest of the North America, particularly in the United States, we're starting to do deployments from coast to coast. So first units are now in California. I think we've got 10 or 15 there, more headed into Montana in the next couple of weeks, several in Missouri, and then a handful scattered in the Mid-Atlantic, New England area. Most of those tied to grants. I will say all of them tied to grants and programs that we're doing there, but also some strategic for, again, temperature reasons, range issues and topography like Montana. We're going to have some more hills to deal with, and we want to see how those hills impact our ability to do range as well. And a couple of other projects are sponsored with utilities. We're looking to do V2X programs to assist not only ourselves, but the utilities on how these buses are going to interact with the grid.
Now, First Student being the largest private fleet contractor in North America, you guys have a lot of clients, and you're probably getting a lot of questions from those clients on what is the path to electric, and you're consulting with them and discussing with them. And it's my understanding you've spent thousands upon thousands of hours filling out grants and forms for the Clean School Bus Lottery, which has yet to be announced at this taping. So we're holding our breath to see what happens. I'm sure you are as well. What were kind of some of the lessons learned, things that kind of came out of those discussions as your customers kind of came to you and said, hey, we'd like to take advantage of this? What were those conversations? What did that look like?
Yeah, fortunately, the Clean School Bus program, this rebate program, was fairly straightforward. Identify the bus and submit the application as you wanted to. So, for us, having, identified 75 school districts that met the EPA high priority category, we wound up submitting 70 applications. Well, it might be a little bit more than that. A couple haven't confirmed what went in. Most of the questions we received were simply around technical. Can the school buses do these routes we're talking about? And we have done that analysis before we decided to go forward with that school district. So we were confident we could do that with them. The big lesson learned is, and this is not just of First Student customers, it's across the board, is the SAM.gov ID situation. If EPA has us use SAM.gov again, you've got to verify your ID way early in the process. We had a number of school districts that waited to the last minute to do that, and they couldn't submit their application because their ID was not valid. We lost several school districts that wanted to apply, could not apply because of that. And so really encourage EPA to make it simpler from that standpoint. But if EPA goes forward with the SAM.gov, every school district should today, regardless if you're priority or not, know what your SAM.gov approach is. So if you do decide to go, you can do it. And if issues need to be fixed, they can be fixed now.
Yeah, I know. I heard some stories of people that couldn't find their passwords. Yep. They're searching. It feels like a very clerical thing, but...
Oh, well, there's one we had where the employee who was registered had quit. And it took them 6 weeks to correct to the new employee, to register a new employee as the contact. So, it's simple things. But again, if you do it now, you got enough time to get it fixed. And it's not just for applying for EPA programs. There are a lot of federal programs that use SAM.gov. So it's good that every school district understands SAM.gov.
Great. Okay, so you win the lottery. You're going to get some grant money. What's really the next step First Student takes to kind of consult with their clients over that process? Infrastructure clearly is probably one of the biggest hurdles to overcome, right?
Yeah, the first thing we'll do after talking to our school district partners that win is reach out to the utilities in those school districts that win to begin to understand the needs we will need to assess for electricity usage at where we're going to do them. And again, we could be doing up to 25 buses at some of these deployments. So that's a pretty big energy consumption. So we'll need to work with the utility and the school district, our landlords, real estate people, to get all that done. And then from there, it's kind of our straightforward assessment program of looking at the routes, looking at the temperature, and determining what type of infrastructure we need to successfully operate the buses in that train. The other thing we're going to be doing, Tony, and we're really excited about this, is we're going to be launching First Student Electric School Bus Consulting. And this will be for non-first student customers, those who just want to understand what needs to be done to electrify their fleet. We think we can really work with a lot of school districts because we're really having an operator to operator discussion. You know, we're the largest operator of electric school buses. We face the same issues that non-contracted out school districts face of delivering children and picking them up every afternoon. So we're going to launch this consulting service to really help our non-customers figure out how to do this, use our expertise, our operational knowledge, now that we're operating over 180 units, to help those other school districts that win these grants do this deployment right, because we all want to be successful. So really excited that, you know, we're going to be able to assist non-customers in this effort to electrify.
Yeah, getting that knowledge is super important. I think people are very hungry. There's so many new suppliers of charging equipment or, you know, purveyors of buses. It's kind of like, who do we choose? And I feel like there's so many entering the market. It causes some confusion with the end user. It's not just a simple ABC choice, right? There's a lot of flavors to choose from. And, you know, how do you navigate all that? So that's really exciting that you're going to be offering EV consulting services for non-customers that may want to get some extra consulting help. So exciting. And then are you also helping them apply for grants as well?
Yes, that will be another part of the service for the next round of grants, either the rebates or the traditional competitive grant EPA is talking about. But we'll also assist them with state grants. We'll also assist them with their discussions with utilities, because some utilities have some pretty creative incentive programs themselves that they can take advantage of. And you're right, Tony, it is so confusing for a lot of school districts because, you know, when you put $5 billion on the table, everybody comes out of the woodwork. And that's why we feel we've got a lot to offer to school districts, because we're technology agnostic. We use different technology at every deployment we use. We use the technology that's going to work. And so I think that's one thing we're really going to be able to help school districts cut through is, what's the best application for your district and your routes, given your utility, your temperature, so forth and so on? Because that's the way we approach it. We don't go in and say, oh yeah, we're going to use X charger, Y bus, let's go. Every single deployment, we analyze on its own and design a system for that particular deployment.
Now, do you see the school district consulting partners taking advantage of your economy of scale since you are the largest buyer of equipment?
We're going to try. It's unclear if certain contracts will allow that to occur, but where it can, yes, we'll try to bring economies of scale to help our customers acquire some materials at potentially lower cost.
Excellent. Well, that's a heck of a value right there. So, Kevin, how do people find more about this consulting service if they want to take advantage of all this offering?
Sure. You can always reach out to electrification at firstgroup.com. That's our email, electrification at firstgroup.com. And that will be responded to by one of our in-house people, depending on what type of question you're asking. We do have a website that's up or will be up fairly shortly that will have a lot of background information. And we'll be proactively reaching out first to the winners of the EPA rebates to let them know that this is an option, and then go out with some general information to other school districts as well in the October and November timeframe.
Well, excellent. We're so glad you came on and shared about this exciting new offering. And we're so happy to hear about your progressive growth in the EV space to really kind of help the communities, kids, all your partners just be better all around. It's great for the industry. Thank you for all you're doing.
Well, Tony, thank you. And we do appreciate everything STN does to educate people. It's critical at this juncture as the industry really faces this sea change of activity. So having a voice they can go to and understand and receive information is critical. And we appreciate all you guys do to get the word out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody have a nice day.
All right, next up, I got an interview with Taylor Hannon and Kristi for Cumberland County Schools. Excited for that.
All right, guys. So I am here with my special guest, Kristi Harden. She's the Executive Director of Transportation for Cumberland County Schools in North Carolina. And she's actually starting off our Rising Star series. So we have a Rising Star kind of being featured throughout the month of October. So hello, Kristi. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen the October issue yet, I would definitely recommend checking that out. But Kristi's actually been in transportation for 22 years. It's a long time.
That is correct. Yes.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into the industry?
So I came to school buses as a school bus driver. I started driving at 18 years old. The coolest bus driver out there. But yeah, I came to transportation. I was a bus driver and it grabbed me right then. And I, even now, as we try to recruit drivers, I tell them, look, you get your keys, you get your route, and you're out there. You just get to work. So yeah, that was how I came. A lot of my early work was in Wake County, which is Raleigh, North Carolina. And then we relocated to Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, all in North Carolina. And there in Charlotte, I was able to work in a few different roles and capacities. But my latest role is Executive Director of Transportation here in Cumberland County.
Yeah, and you were actually hired right before kids went back to school in person after the pandemic. So what a crazy time to be taking on that role.
Yes, quite different. Well, all during the pandemic, it changed almost every few weeks. There was a new plan for how we would potentially return students to school. So we had started doing that work. I was working in Charlotte. And because it's the same state, it's like we were all kind of drinking from the same pot. So when I got the job here in Cumberland, it was a smooth transition. I mean, I was already very familiar with, what practices had been put in place across the state of North Carolina. But coming in here to Cumberland, I think anywhere, but especially here, the routes had to be, they were pretty much built from scratch, because you're trying to plan for what students will actually return. You've got one number that says this is the number of students, but then how many are actually going to show up and use the bus? So yes, and that was a very different time. We were working through driver shortages, just an overall decline in ridership. But yeah, it was very interesting. As COVID restrictions relaxed, ridership increased and more people were comfortable sending their kids back to school. So,
and you guys are a pretty large district, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when you kind of look at it, yeah, I guess so.
I think 30,000 students?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so pretty large.
Yeah. So we're running 436 buses this year. So yeah, I would say that's pretty large.
So how has your routing been, for this year and coming out of the pandemic? Were there any big challenges that you had to overcome, or maybe some lessons learned from some previous years that you were able to take for this year?
Yes. So last year, coming in new to the county and even new to the role, we didn't really know what we were planning for. It was just kind of like, build it and we'll see if they come. But this year, just going through last year, almost flying blind, we were able to put a few things in place, which really helped us improve our overall service levels. One of the big things that we did this year from last year, we rolled out Here Comes the Bus. And there's so many different programs that are, tracking and doing now, but here we're using Here Comes the Bus to track students, well, the arrival time of the bus. The parents have been elated to have access to something like that. And it just speaks to the world that we live in now. People want that level of transparency. A lot of what I looked at last year being new here was just kind of how can we improve service levels? Like that is something a lot of times that just we miss it sometimes. So just hearing from schools, how can we improve service levels not just from schools but even from our drivers? How can we marry the two up? So we put a few procedures in place coming in this year. We made changes to our school bus driver handbook. We implemented a pre and post trip book for drivers as they perform their pre trips and their post trips. We work to provide schools with their transportation information just to make it as easy as possible for them. So we gave bus passes this year so they didn't have the headache of trying to write out bus information for each student, or, we provided that information to them. So, we tried to upgrade a little bit this year, taking small bites.
Yeah. And I know one of the things that kind of caught our eye when looking through Rising Stars is you also added more instructors, increased your driver hour education. There was kind of this backlog caused by the pandemic, and you kind of found a way to almost overcome that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Again, I think a lot of times, when you have certain obstacles in front of you, like you really have to take time to like research it, or just really get a better understanding of what's the root cause for us. And it played out in two ways in this role, because it played out for our school bus drivers, but then I'm also responsible for driver's ed. But it played out with our school bus drivers because I introduced the school bus driver trainer position. And in that role, this individual works specifically with helping our school bus drivers maximize their training opportunities. So she is the liaison between the schools and our department and DMV. And so she functions in that space. Here in Cumberland County, our drivers are what you would call dual employees. So we have some drivers that are just 100%, they belong to transportation, but the majority of our drivers are teacher assistants, cafeteria workers, custodial staff. So they work in dual roles.
Oh, wow.
Because they are hired by the school, we don't always have that immediate access to them. So this position was key because it allows the school bus driver trainer to maneuver and just kind of, she like ties up all of the loose ends as it pertains to the training. So as the employee comes in for training, she holds their hand and she walks them through the entire process. I mean, regulations are changing all over as to how we issue a license and what the requirements are. So she stays up on all of that. And when we have opportunities to, just shorten that gap, she's there. She's been so instrumental with that. So that has been major. I mean, we cut our waiting list, our backlog, we cut it in half. Just being able to front load our staff with, hey, this is what you can anticipate as you enter into the training process. So we have more of a success rate when they go into the training. So it's been good. It really has.
That's awesome.
It's got a great team.
Mm-hmm. So with that dual role, was that a directed effort to try and get more people from the schools to transportation? Or has that always been the case where, you can have a dual role at Cumberland?
Yeah, it's always been here in Cumberland, well, at least since I've been here. I actually think in learning more, it was in response to a legislative decision years back where they decreased the number of teacher assistants that could be utilized in the school. So, as a district, this was part of the plan that they came up with to ensure like you could have staff. So it's been nice coming from a county where the drivers belong to transportation. So when
Hmm.
you have drivers that are out, you are shaking the bushes to try to find coverage for a route. It still happens here, but it's not as magnified because you have an excess of people that hold CDLs. So they are now working in various roles, and it's still a function of trying to manage to make sure classrooms have what they need, but it definitely looks a little different.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, something else that you did, another big initiative, was creating a bus driver advisory group. Now, this is very interesting. So, I really want you to really talk about this and explain this through because I think this concept is so cool.
So, as you've already seen, sometimes I can be just a little bit animated, just a little. So, coming in, we were exposed to a bus driver walkout. It was because we have the dual roles, the impact was not as great as it is or it was in districts around us that didn't have the dual role employees. Nevertheless, we still were impacted by it. Our special needs transportation buses, they had the greatest impact. The first day of the sick out, the superintendent wanted to meet. No, we were leading up to it. He wanted to meet with all of the drivers, and they had a lot of concerns. I mean,
Hmm.
they had concerns and they wanted answers. It's not always the pay that will drive those concerns. Certainly, pay helps, but if you've ever sat in that seat as a driver, it's there are a number of things that we're responsible for that will oftentimes they're overlooked, or you know our understanding of how a consequence was issued, it may not make sense to me sitting in the driver's seat, but there could be other pieces that are at play in the school building. So again, like that marriage, that partnership, like it really has to align, for there to be just that fluid success. So we did. We brought a lot of them in, and they were very vocal about their concerns. They were. We were able to reach a common ground that day just so we could dismiss and leave. But one of the promises that I made to the group, we will do this again. And so that has been my promise. In fact, I spoke with Miss Pierce, another member of the team today, and so we're going to get together. Our first meeting will be in 2 weeks for this go round. So we have an advisory council, and the drivers could apply to be on it. I mean, they just submit their request. Last year, the response was so overwhelming, we ended up breaking it up into 2 sessions. So if you're on the advisory council, you serve the first semester or the first half of the year, but then we had to do a new group for the second half of the year, for the second semester. And that was just to allow as many people as possible to attend. So we meet once a month, and we have topics that are outlined, and we target those things that concern them. Pay. A lot of the concerns were COVID and not feeling like the drivers were protected and or notified if there were situations that came up. Discipline concerns. So we brought in, here in Cumberland County, they have like a administrator advisory council, and it's principals and APs. Well, we brought that group to the table, and the members of the advisory council, they were able to bring concerns, and there were specific concerns, and some of those principals were in the room, but it just created a safe space for people to share, what concerns they had. We take notes. If there are questions that come up during the meeting that we can't answer then, we follow all of the meetings up with notes, a copy of the notes that they all have access to, the questions that were asked, the answers that we were able to find out. But it has been really good. I mean, it helped me learn so much about this district anyway. I mean, just hearing what some of there, and it's not all bad. I mean, there are really good things that come out of those meetings. So yes, we do. We meet monthly.
I think that's, for the bus drivers, you're empowering them to have a voice, to say, hey, this is what's going well, this isn't. So I think that's a really great idea. And I think maybe more school districts should kind of take that on.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun, I tell you. You just better be ready.
Yeah, you have to be able to take their comments, huh?
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so kind of switching gears a little bit, are there any big initiatives you guys are looking at for this year, or maybe alternative fuels, technology, anything that you're kind of focused on for this school year?
So we have purchased our first propane buses. They have not arrived as of yet. We are so excited and awaiting their arrival. So we are moving in that direction. We are starting out with propane. We are open to exploring others, but right now that was the easiest transition for us. So yeah, we're on the move with that as well. Our greatest initiative right now, well, I would just say our biggest project right now, we are working to equip all of our school buses with two-way radios.
Okay.
We want to make sure that, again, that information remains fluid. When we have a driver that may need something, when we have a school that may need something, it just enhances our ability to be able to serve. So that's our next project that's on the books. So.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Kristi. Well, thank you so much for jumping in on the podcast and sharing all that with us. Very insightful. I really love the Bus Driver Advisory Group. And for those, again, who haven't read the October issue, definitely go check it out. Can you leave us with a little bit of advice or any sort of lasting words, Kristi, as we end this episode?
All I will say is, this work, it is ongoing. Like, it will always be a work that will directly impact what happens in the school building. So, to anybody that might be out there with ideas or just kind of struggling to work through something, we have this running joke. I mean, the wheels on the bus, like, they're going to always go round and round. It's like, hang in there, reach out to those that are right around you, because I promise you, they have a different perspective, and they have just, there may be a different way of looking at it. But yeah, I mean, this is great work, and we're all going to just keep giving it everything we got.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I hope to see you at one of our upcoming shows next year. I know as a Rising Star, you get free general admission, so I hope to see you there.
Yes, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
All right, special thanks to Kevin Matthews jumping on, Kristi Harden joining the episode. Great conversation. Special thanks to my co-host, Mr. Ryan Gray. Taylor Hannon Ekbatani. I got it right this time, Taylor. I hooked you up, girl. Shout out to our sponsors, TransFinder and First Student. We appreciate your support of this episode. Guys, visit stnonline.com for everything happening in the school transportation industry. Also, it's the last week to register for the TSD conference. Registration online closes Friday, the 14th, October 14th. That is it. We're pulling the plug. We'll see you in Frisco, Texas, November 8th through the 13th. We are like 30 days away or less. Guys, you got to sign up. The ultimate in special needs transportation training. You care about special needs kids. You care about training. This is the conference for you. Got to come check it out. tsdconference.com for all the details on that. Guys, also remember, this podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to pods. Share it with your friends too. Get it out there. Spread the word, nation. We love you. We'll see you next week.